Welcome into the Blake Street Banter, Rockies Insider on Blake Street Banter. I'm your host, Patrick Lyons. Join with me, as always, each and every Tuesday, Noah Spirek. What's going on, buddy?
Nothing much. I'm kind of dealing with some haircut trauma right now because it's only a couple hours into marinating. I like typically giving it a couple days before settling in, but we're here.
Throw a like if you enjoy the haircut. What if they don't? Leave a comment on how bad it is.
Yeah. We got to get the engagement. So leave a comment. Tell me how it could have been better.
Got to get that improvement. Yes. Yeah, look, there's a lot of teams right now that are getting haircuts in terms of their roster, because that's what we're going to be talking about today is not necessarily the injuries around the game of baseball all throughout Major League Baseball, which we know is a part of the game. And certainly this time of year, it's extension season. And it's also, so-and-so needs Tommy John surgery season. And the Rockies have one of their own on that list. But ultimately, do the Rockies have enough depth for this season to withstand certain injuries to their club? How have you been taking, as a baseball fan in general, all the news of the guys that are not going to be ready to start opening day and those few that are going to be out for all of 2025?
Yeah, well, the first big one was Gerrit Cole. Saw that he might need it, but the Yankees were going to go for a second opinion. Ultimately, he's going to end up undergoing that surgery. But that one was that sent shockwaves throughout the fans and myself, because it's like, whoa, like we were just getting ramped up. But you always hate to see it. And with the Rockies, feels like in recent years, they've had so many pitchers go down with injuries. It does feel like they're in a better spot heading into 2025, which is refreshing.
It's definitely refreshing, I think, is that right word, where you feel good about that. And you look on paper that the depth that the Rockies have, a lot of it is prospects. And we'll get into whether or not prospects can fill the shoes of an everyday player or a veteran player or an all-star caliber player. As you said, Gerrit Cole undergoing the knife, that would have been performed on Tuesday. Yankees also losing Luis Gil, rookie of the year last year, with a lat strain. The Mariners are dealing with George Kirby's shoulder inflammation. He will start 2025 on the IL, as will the Red Sox Brian Bayo with his shoulder strain. Staying in the AL East, Grayson Rodriguez, elbow inflammation. In the National League East, Sean Manaea and Frankie Montas out with an oblique strain and lat strain, respectively. In the NL West, Michael Grove needs Tommy John surgery. And as long as that list is, it's probably going to double by the time we hit opening day on March 27th.
Yeah, and you think back to last year when Shane Bieber went down almost instantly, and you kind of have to weigh, well, is it better to find out earlier, or is it worse if you pitch with an injury thinking it's not serious and then you end up with an even more serious injury? Regardless, having star power get hurt is not good for the game. And I'm sure the AL East fans are probably going at each other because every time one of the teams lost someone, as you just outlined, another team would lose one of their stars. And you know, at this stage, I'm just glad that the Rockies haven't been decimated. But as we'll get into, they have some health questions of their own, and not just with pitching.
It's true. Yes. In talking about not just pitching, there's a couple position players too. Seems like a lot less than pitchers that have gone down to injury. Mets catcher Francisco Alvarez left hamate bone surgery, something that Sean Bouchard had in the offseason, and he seems to have bounced back pretty quickly. That's not a major type of surgery, but he's going to be out, I believe, the first 6 to 8 weeks of the season. Same with Sean Murphy of Atlanta, another catcher, cracked rib. And then sticking with the Yankees, Giancarlo Stanton, injuries to both elbows, just bad elbows. I've never heard about any position player just having a general overall bad elbow, let alone two bad elbows. So he had some PRP injections. Not really sure what's going to end up happening for him.
I was kind of less surprised when I heard that it was him getting those elbow injuries, because that dude swings for the fences every single time. And gosh, sometimes it looks like he can poke a ball barely touching it and it'll go 430 feet. He has some special strength. But you just hate to see these guys going down, because so much time in the offseason is spent on what ifs. And when before the season even starts, a large piece of that puzzle is on the injured list, it's a bit of a dagger before game one is even played.
No, that's a great point. It's the opposite of, hey, so-and-so signed this player right before the start of the season. What an immediate injection of a star guy in the middle of your lineup or in your rotation. Instead, it's the opposite effect when you have a guy like last year, as you said, Shane Bieber go down to Tommy John, or for Atlanta, Spencer Strider going down for Tommy John, and then Ronald Acuna Jr. getting hurt again. So those injuries can be just as much of a factor in these pennant races on the negative side as a big signing could be. Infield hits in our chat saying it's a long season, would much prefer a slow ramp up in volume for young pitchers compared to jumping into games and hitting an innings cap before the season ends. I think that's an important piece to this. That's why you need to have depth. So, for one veteran guy that can maybe step up and hold serve, so to speak, and hold the fort down as a number 4 or 5 starter. With a young guy, it might be twice as hard to do that. You might need 2 of those kind of guys for every one young guy because of the typical growing pains that can go into that, because of those kind of cap limits. I think that it's just a shame in baseball for stuff like this to happen. I know it kind of goes down in other sports. I don't think quite as much. I don't think the movements in those sports, it's strange to say that football doesn't have quite as many violent movements. It's just violent in general. But in baseball, yeah, you've got the most exciting time of the year, and yet actually the worst possible news that you could get. And going back to what you said earlier, I think getting this out of the way early is probably a lot better than later on in the year, because Spencer Strider, Atlanta's counting on him to come back and be important for them in the second half. Easier said than done, because you lose a lot of touch. You use a lot of control and command when you get Tommy John surgery. So he's not going to be Spencer Strider until 2026, but still a half a season of him is a lot more than the Rockies got from someone like Antonio Senzatella, who had his surgery, closer to midway through the season and only just barely returned. So get it out of the way early. That can be maybe perhaps the silver lining in general for these teams that have lost guys, at least to Tommy John.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. There's never a good time to lose a guy, but if you can lose a guy for March instead of September, then that's huge, and you'll take that every day of the week. I look at the landscape of the sport, and with the velocity being as high as it's ever been, these pitchers, and you've kind of seen some of the retired players in recent years talk about it, the pitchers are throwing 100% on every single pitch. It's not like Zach Greinke anymore. And I know Zach Greinke would grunt when he'd pitch, but there was still a difference in effort where these guys, gosh, they're putting everything into every pitch. And over the course of a season, that definitely wears on the arm. Tommy John numbers are as high as they've ever been. And it's interesting because I feel like the game is still trying to catch up to that in terms of how teams are ramping pitchers up. It's March 11th, and Kyle Freeland today went out and threw over 70 pitches. And every team has a scientific plan, and I know the Rockies have worked on this in the lab, their pitching lab out in Arizona, tirelessly. But, I mean, I'm just asking you, does it surprise you that guys are already throwing 70 plus pitches in games?
Not so much. I think Freeland was able to ramp up really quickly. This was his first outing since February 28th. So that, I think, is probably what the most surprising piece to that is. But the first part of your statements was the biggest factor in terms of Tommy John. I mean, as you said, a lot of the old timers, look, they could throw every 3 days because they weren't throwing 100%. So they weren't taxing their bodies or their elbows or their shoulders to this same degree. And the game is trying to figure out different ways to take away the emphasis on velocity. And they can only do that. They can't do that in the sense that every single team has an emphasis on that. So how can they make individual teams put less value on things like that? And again, that's where you get into some of the rule changes that might be coming out, trying to increase contact over anything else, reducing the shift, trying to get runners moving more with the stolen bases. And then, the idea of the double hook rule, which was something that was floated during the 2024 season of, well, if your pitcher comes out too early, and again, there'll be a set of standards, but if your pitcher comes out too early and it's not an injury, then you're going to lose your DH and you're going to have some pitchers hitting, or you're going to have to extinguish a lot of your bench. And why are you going to take a guy out super early? Well, because you got relievers that can throw 100 with ease because they're throwing with 100% max effort. So trying to restore some of the prestige of starting pitchers who have typically thrown a lot less velocity than relievers is one way of doing that. But right now we still have starting pitchers throwing as fast as guys that were shut down closers. And Jacob deGrom, I think, even recently talked about how fast he would throw and how the game has changed just in his lifetime as a big leaguer. So that's certainly something the league would like to try to change, so that, hey, you could throw 70 pitches on March 11th, but if you're throwing at max velocity with every single pitch in both spring and in the regular season, you're going to go down, you're going to miss parts of 2 years. And now the baseball fans, your team, your fan base, and the sport as a whole is going to lose a lot of those superstar players. And that's just not good for the game.
No, and I think you nailed it right on the head. Turning more towards just the Colorado Rockies, how have they fared early on here with health? I know Austin Gomber has come up several times early in the early going, but is there anyone else that is worth keeping an eye on?
Yeah, Philip asking a really good question, which we'll get to in just a second, a little bit about the health of these pitchers and who could possibly step up if they're not ready for opening day. As I alluded to earlier, Jeff Criswell is in need of Tommy John surgery, so he's done for the entirety of this season. That does take away a little bit from the bullpen depth. Lucas Gilbreth seems to be behind schedule a little bit after off-season neurogenic thoracic outlet syndrome surgery. So it kind of remains to be seen when he's going to be back. He did pitch on Monday, I believe, for the first time in spring training. So that's really good to see. Hopefully he can contribute to the bullpen at some point this year. He does have options, so they can be very cautious with him. Sean Sullivan behind schedule after off-season hip surgery, but in general, he seems to be in good shape. But Austin Gomber, as Philip is asking in the chat, he's had some shoulder inflammation and essentially pulled himself from his outing. I want to say it was March 2nd. It was a Sunday against the Mariners, was feeling that soreness. Bud Black said he could him and the staff were able to identify that, yeah, Gomber wasn't looking great after some of his pitches and grimacing in pain. Something that he said that ultimately, if this were in the middle of the season, he could go out there and go. And you say, well, why can't you do that now? It's because there's 6+ months left of the season at worst case scenario, right? If he gets traded, or, hey, the Rockies would like to think that maybe they could get into the postseason. So now that's going to extend your year by another week to a month. So now is not the right time to feel like you're behind, or to feel like your body is betraying you in that way. So you know what? The Rockies have a little bit of a luxury to take a step back. Bud Black has even said that they could go with a 4-man rotation for the start of the season. They've got an off day on what would be the 5th day of their season, or, they play 4 games in a row. Then in Philadelphia, they're off on that Tuesday. So that helps them out just a little bit. And you look and say, well, Gomber, or the number 5 starter, really won't be needed until game number 16 of the season. So he could start the year on the IL, and you can kind of go with 2 long relievers if you need. I think that might be, kind of wise to do something like that. And it allows you to get through and give Gomber a little bit of an extra break, or even give an opportunity to a Chase Dollander if he becomes the guy that gets that number 5 spot, which again, they don't really need the first time and a half through the order.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because in a baseball calendar, a team only gets X amount of off days, and they'll all tell you it's not enough. But it feels like at the start of the season, there's so many banked up. Do you know the specific amount of off days they get throughout the year?
During the regular season?
Yeah.
No, they have negotiated more and more. So it does stretch out. I think so. They play 162 games, and I want to say maybe 182 days, something like
Yeah.
that. So it might be good 20 days off. So 2 every 3 weeks, something like that.
And it feels like 6 of the 20 are in April. That probably is a bit exaggerating, but it is a lot. And as you outlined, the Rockies could go until game 16 with only 4 starting pitchers. It will be interesting to see if they go that route. Of course, having 2 long inning relief guys isn't a bad thing when you play half your games at Coors Field. I think the second part of what you were mentioning there, and we can come back to the injuries if need be later in the show, but you mentioned Chase Dollander, what his role might look like at the start of the season. And just last week, we were talking about the percentages of him being on the opening day roster. It's been a little bit rough so far for Chase. I'm wondering, is his 12.15 ERA cause for concern to you?
A little, but I wouldn't say a lot. I honestly wouldn't say a lot. And it's not just the small sample size thing. Infield Hits in the chat over on YouTube. Leave a comment if you're listening to this on the podcast side. But this is probably the biggest question. Do you want Dollander getting that first opportunity at more advanced hitters in the Pacific Coast League, which isn't even a hitters league? It's a masochists league, right? It's just, it's awful. It's difficult. It's challenging. Or do you want him doing it at the major league level? Sure, the hitters are going to be even more advanced, but the coaching is arguably going to be a lot better. These are big league coaches. There's more of them as well. And there's big league teammates that can also become mentors to him. So I think that's a big piece of it. The thing that from everyone that I've spoken to and I've heard from on the coaching staff and within the front office, there's just this general belief that because he finished last year at AA, only at AA, we'll say, he just hasn't had enough opportunities against more advanced hitters. And that's just going to take time. He still has all the pieces, all of the elements to be successful. They still need to find a bridge to get to all of these young players, considering Gomber and Marquez are free agents after this season. Senzatella, Freeland are not under contract past 2026. They could come back on options, mutual, otherwise, but they need to give some opportunity to those guys. And it seems as if Dollander is going to be that exception of, you know what, he can learn up here for a little bit, then maybe go back down to AAA. So they're speaking very highly of him. He's been very mature, and he knows that the numbers haven't been great, but he's also been able to, get punched in the face and then rebound back from it and go past that. And he didn't really get punched in the face. He kind of, knocked himself out, stepping under the rope. He bumped his head on the second turnbuckle, if you will, to stick with the analogy, and almost knocked himself out with those 4 walks because he only gave up 2 hits. But he just was yanking everything. He identified that. He said enough of the right things, but he was, very much acknowledging, like, yeah, he knows what he's doing. He knows what he did wrong. And that's a huge piece that a lot of young pitchers don't know, and they don't have that tool, that maturity level that he does have. So, whether he has a 6 ERA in Albuquerque or in the big leagues, it's kind of one and the same. So you know what? You might as well see if you can utilize him and maybe even avoid that 6 ERA at the big league level. So I still tend to think we maybe are going down to the 45th percentile with Dollander, but he's getting those opportunities. You look around camp right now, and there aren't quite as many starting pitchers that are still around. Tanner Gordon, who was fantastic. Nope, he got optioned down to minor league camp, representing the Hoosiers there. So the sky's still the limit for him. It's just really a matter of where he gets his start. It will be in 2025, but will it be on that opening day roster, in that opening rotation? That remains to be seen.
Yeah, you said it. Maturity is the name of the game for Dollander. And whether it's his PR team, the Rockies PR team, or just our fan base, it feels like that's been the only narrative that's been pushed. You could go online, and I don't think you'd be able to find that he had a 12 ERA. That's how well our fans are covering it up, because it's spring training. And I mean, you covered it well. The walks is what got him into trouble in his most recent outing. And last year when I asked Bud Black about Chase Dollander, he kind of told me the same thing. It's all about with him, can he get the ball in the strike zone? And shoot, Chase knows it. You don't get to this high of a level without realizing it. The one thing Dollander always says is to keep calm. It's the same 60 feet, 6 inches that you've been pitching against since high school. And I think, as you outlined, he has the makeup to be a superstar. And I think already some of the pressure that's been placed on him, there's been articles calling him the savior of the franchise, the guy that can lift the Rockies out of this not rebuild, reconstruction period. Dollander will be just fine, and his spring training ERA will never be spoken about after he makes his major league debut. So all signs go for Chase. I want to shift to another starting pitcher that has been really, really impressive so far. Antonio Senzatella making his return after a long road back, as you mentioned. What have you seen out of him in his early outings?
He's been very consistent, right? He's been throwing strikes and he's been missing bats, which is really not a typical part of his game. Fastball has been, sitting, a touch higher than it's been in the past. I know he really worked on his nutrition during the off season, so he was able to drop a little bit of weight. And, he's a player that he recognizes his role as one of the more veteran players on the staff, still only 29 years old, but this will be his 9th season in purple pinstripes. So he's been around for a hot minute, to say the least. And he's just looked really solid. He's been providing length. And I think we've seen outings like this from Senzatella in the past over a stretch. And again, it is still just spring training, but that's the kind of, bombastic performance that you want to have. A guy can be really bad. Let's make excuses for him. He's really good. You can make excuses and say, well, he's probably not going to continue, but still you would rather have it that way. And it's funny because I think that's what, going back to Dollander for a second, that he said in the interview with Blake Street Banter with myself and Aaron, was like, hey, I could have a perfect 0 ERA and I still might have to get sent down. And in the past with the Rockies, you go, yeah, you probably would, because of the way that the Rockies operate, but they've been operating a little bit differently than in the past, and they've been speaking a lot differently. And that's why I think partially what gives you that hope that Dollander is going to get that opportunity. So, Senzatella was probably the one guy that, if you were looking on paper and say, well, who's going to be on the outside looking in, if Dollander is performing and doing all the things that the coaching staff wants to see, it might have to be Antonio Senzatella. But all things being considered, with him and Marquez coming back from Tommy John surgery, they may have to watch his innings just like they have to watch all of the young starters and really be cautious with them and really operate like so many teams around the game are operating, with 6 starters, not a 6-man rotation, but just 6 starters that they will shuffle in and out to get, 15 to 25 starts. In order to keep them healthy for the 6-month season, somewhat of a load management, right? And now with Dollander in the fold, Senzatella performing well, and then even a guy like Bradley Blaylock, who's been pitching well, you could really see like, okay, maybe the Rockies could operate that day instead of 4 days off in between starts. Maybe it's more like 5. Maybe it is a stint on the IL because you are banged up, right? That's true. You are injured in that way, in the general way of throwing a baseball overhand, which is an unnatural movement. That's one of the ways that they can allow 6 or more starters to stay healthy throughout the marathon.
I am shocked that Antonio Senzatella is 9 years into his time with the Rockies, because it feels like just yesterday I was watching him in the National League Division Series against Milwaukee after I got home from school. That is so hard to imagine that it's already been that long. But I think the early returns from him are really a cause for optimism for the season, because if you were to ask any of the fans, any of the members of Blake Street Banter, any person in the front office, if the Rockies truly feel as though they can make a leap this year to contend for a wild card spot, be in meaningful games in September, it was going to have to be German Marquez and Antonio Senzatella taking steps back to where they used to be. Because as Bud Black says, like, starting pitching is the backbone of success. I think he'd throw that on a shirt if he had the chance. So you might have to help him out there. Senzatella playing this well, at spring training, is a huge lift to the team. And the other name that you mentioned in there, Bradley Blaylock, feels like he's been the buzz name of camp so far, other than Jeffrey Yan, who I guess we'll talk about the transactions in just a bit. But Blaylock, as Philip again commented in the chat, whether you need a fifth starter earlier or not, I guess Patrick Lyons, Rockies insider, I'll ask you straight up, who would be more likely to be the fifth starter right now, Chase Dollander or Bradley Blaylock?
I would think it would be Chase Dollander. You saw it on Saturday when Dollander was in his jam, walked the 5 hitters, pitch count was kind of getting up there, at least for 2 innings of an outing. And who came in relief but Bradley Blaylock? That gives you a little bit of an idea of where they are thinking about his place on this roster. I think going into spring, Carson Palmquist, by all accounts, was going to be one of those guys that was lining up to be the long reliever. There was a passing in his family, so he's only recently gotten back to action, so he's a little bit behind schedule. He's also not on the 40-man roster as of right now, so you still need that long reliever spot. And in general, as I said before, the Rockies' thought process is changing, where especially now that they have so many players on the precipice of the majors, which seems to be a good thing, and many people would argue that it is, but it can come with its downsides, and we'll touch on that in a little bit. But you've got all of these guys that are ready for the majors. Now is the time to just start to play them, rather than giving that time to veteran players. It's better to lose 100 games. It's better to lose 110 games with all young players than it is to only, quote unquote, only lose 99 games with a veteran staff where you have a mix of young players, especially if you don't know what those young players are going to be going forward, because they only got a taste of the majors and there's still these unknown quantities, right? Like you go and look at after 2022 and 2023, and you would have hoped to have gotten some answers about Zach Veen and Nolan Jones, that one more about his injuries last year. But so, countless many other players that you would have liked to have answers on that you didn't get right away. We finally have some answers on Michael Toglia about what he can do, but it took a really long time. And now these prospects have run out of runway. There's nowhere else for them to go except in the majors. And I said this earlier on the Effectively Wild podcast that I think it'll be coming out Tuesday night or maybe Wednesday morning. I did a season preview with Ben Lindbergh and Meg Rowley of Fangraphs. But, the Rockies have so many outfield prospects in AA and above, right? There's something like 8 of their top 12, 10 of their top 15 prospects are outfielders. And if there's an outfield prospect that's the best available to them in next year's draft, 4th overall, well, they always pick the best player. So you're going to pick that outfielder, right? And it doesn't take a mathematician or a sabermetrician to know there's only 3 outfield spots. And right now, one of those is occupied by Brenton Doyle. So you've run out of runway for a lot of these guys, and you have to give them opportunity. And when it comes to the depth of this team, so much of it is down in AAA, and it's also unproven. And the Rockies' big league staff and their front office is a little bit unproven with how they're going to deal with a situation like that. Because on one hand, if Beck or Nolan Jones doesn't get the job done in the corners and you call up Zach Veen, you can either or rather, he can hit the ground running. He absolutely can hit the ground running. But what if he doesn't? Are you going to give him a lot of runway to figure some things out? And then maybe he does, but while he's figuring it out, you're going to lose a few games. Or are you going to say, we gave him 3 weeks. Now it's Yankiel Fernandez's turn. And then it's just this rotating, carousel of prospects coming up and, showing some flashes, but then struggling because they're young big leaguers, right? like we saw with Hunter Goodman in 2023 and in early parts of 2024. Like, it's going to take time. And in many ways, I think the Rockies have run out of time with all of their prospects. And so they've got to get a lot right with this team if they are going to be contenders and be relevant in 2026.
It feels like we could talk about how the Rockies manage their AAA roster every single week, because it is consistently filled with the young, talented players that they believe can take a step forward and really contribute, whether it's a utility player or a real stud that they think can make a difference in moving this team towards competing for the playoffs or the postseason. I think the way that they handled Sam Hilliard there is not too far different from what they've done with a lot of their guys. And I do believe that they're trying to shake that, because they know that the Pacific Coast League is so tough to develop talent and get it. Like, you need a gauge, and it is so hard to get an accurate reading when the numbers are what they are in Albuquerque. You and I both wish that we had an easy solution to address that. I don't know where you could, talking about how they have so many outfield prospects, and we'll use the runway example that you were using. I guess if we're running out of runway, or already have, what's the best strategy now to, try to still get the plane off the ground? Are you catching my drift?
Your drift has been caught. Yes. I think, attrition is going to be something that happens. Wild the Innocent in the chat, is Veen going to stay healthy? If he doesn't, then somebody will step up and take his spot. And so that's again, part of their depth strategy that is positive, while at the same time, I think there are other organizations that would look, and I'm not going to say put all their eggs in one basket, but they would say, we are going to bank on these few players, and the ones that we've deemed to not really have that it factor that we think they need to be successful big leaguers, let's just turn around and trade them for something that we do need. Utilize those assets. And they definitely struggle with that. So, I would love for that final spot on the bench, which we talked about last week, and it's kind of, evolved a little bit more to possibly going to a more veteran type player like a Sean Bouchard and a Nick Martini. But I think it would benefit to have someone like a Zach Veen on that big league roster, at least to start the year, and try to get as much playing time for him as possible. And if it doesn't come to fruition, he can go back to AAA to get more regular playing time. But at least now that clock has started for him to know what it takes to be a big leaguer. So when he does get that next opportunity, it can be that much more. We've talked about that momentum, that health momentum for Zach Veen. It's also true for Kris Bryant. Him just staying on the field for 100, 120 games this season is a success for taking that step forward. So I don't have a definitive solution for how to handle all of these outfield prospects right now at this point in the season, but perhaps there is a trade out there where the Rockies can get creative and trade from that outfield prospect depth to improve in an area that needs help, not necessarily help right now, immediately in 2025, like they did last year when they got Jay Cave late in spring. That helped the 2024 team. And, I don't think you're a numerologist, Noah, but I'm pretty sure you're aware that it's 2025 now. So everything that happened in 2024 is very much moot. So thinking about 2025 when you're making a trade, I don't think is going to benefit the future of this franchise as much as thinking about 2026 or maybe even beyond 27 and 28, getting an even younger prospect that has some polish on him. Like, I think that's a creative way of improving the future of the roster as a whole.
Well, and ultimately it's a results-driven game. It will be interesting to see how the Rockies navigate these position battles where they have a lot of depth, and ideally guys just step up and separate themselves to make the decisions as easy as possible. I think now we'll shift to the transactions that have been happening recently, and there's been a couple disappointing ones, at least from my perspective as a fan. Jeffrey Yan getting optioned to minor league camp over this past weekend. You mentioned Tanner Gordon getting optioned, Yanquiel Fernandez, another name. Can you give the listeners a little bit more and maybe some of the reasoning behind some of these moves? Because some of these guys were playing well, yet here they are on their way to minor league camp instead of staying with big league camp.
The Tanner Gordon one, I'm a little bit confused about, simply because, again, there's been some questions with the health of the staff, with Gomber being banged up, Carson Palmquist getting that late start. Again, he's not even on the 40-man roster, whereas Gordon is. Blaylock pitching well, but you're looking at him maybe more as the long reliever. So I sort of think there's a chance that, well, wait a minute, it could be somewhat of a numbers game where you might need to keep a guy like him around. As far as Jeffrey Yan is concerned, no, he was a player that I really didn't think in the offseason was going to make this roster or even pitch in Denver at all, the entirety of the season. Now, if he goes out and performs, then yeah, absolutely. He could find his way onto this roster. He's throughout 5 seasons in the minors, he has a 6.7 walks per 9. And he's just struggled to find strikes. So that's kind of a big one. He's almost a left-handed version of Riley Pint. Is if he can get into the zone, it's exciting, it's electric, but ultimately he just isn't there yet. I think he could, find a way onto the roster. Again, that's if a lot of things go wrong, right? Luis Peralta, you expect to be on the roster as the number 2 lefty for the entirety of the season. I say number 2 because Scott Alexander is their veteran guy. We'll see what happens if he gets traded at the deadline. Don't hold your breath, because we know the Rockies are more apt to hold on to their guys rather than move them at the deadline. So you've got Peralta there. Evan Justice also got sent down. He's on the 40-man roster as a lefty reliever. Lucas Gilbreth, as we mentioned earlier, he still has an opportunity to work on a couple things. He's on the 40-man. So those are 4 guys right there that are ahead of Jeffrey Yan going forward. Could Palmquist get converted into a reliever? Possibly. That's another guy that Yan would be behind. So we'll have to really wait and see what his performances are going to be like. I think he'll be around for the entirety of the season with the Isotopes. I think the fans down in Albuquerque will absolutely love him. He'll be exciting. He'll be a fan favorite. And again, there's still a chance if he plays really well, that's all he can control, right? But if some guys end up going down to injury, then you could see him. But odds are probably against that. Unfortunately, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but we're not going to be seeing Yan in Denver.
Well, and it would have been a situation where, with the way they signed him, anything that he gives is a bonus.
Yeah,
he was really signed as a depth piece.
It's a good non-roster deal for sure.
Yeah, and so you can live with that, even though, gosh, it would have been so exciting to even hear his walk-up song at Coors Field. What would that have been coming out of the bullpen? He would have had to get a lights show in the 6th inning, down by 8.
Does he have a walkout song? I don't think guys really have walkout in spring training, but
yeah, at Coors it would have been interesting.
That leave a comment in the chat. Like what's the song to get it fired up? I mean, you can't take the Timmy trumpets. I mean, that's obviously already taken by Edwin Diaz, so that's not going to go down. But sure, yeah, it would probably be something definitely lively and get you pumped up.
Yeah, and Brian in the chat, nice to hear Yankiel hit the Oppo Taco home run yesterday. Another guy that went yard, I saw, thanks to the Rockies insider Patrick Lyons. Ezekiel Tovar, how about him hitting a bomb off of Logan Webb? That's the Giants' stud pitcher, so that's always good to see, because it feels like the Rockies are never able to touch Webb. Another question from Philip in the chat that I'll let you take, Patrick. Who are the locks for the right-handed arms out of the bullpen?
First off, I love the comments over in the YouTube channel, and you bring up a kind of an interesting point, or we touched on it a little bit with Brian. Just because some of these guys do get optioned down to the minors, to the minor league side of camp, or to AAA as they call it, you can still see them in games, right? Like there's still 44 guys in big league camp with 11 non-roster invites. So that should be enough, to field a full team in a full 9 innings. But certain guys need off days, or just, have those nagging injuries. So you give them a day off. So you're still going to see some of those guys that maybe did get reassigned. As far as the right-handed locks in the bullpen, Tyler Kinley, of course, as the one veteran, he's looked really solid. I have a feeling you might want to talk about him more in a little bit here, Noah. He's an obvious lock, right? Seth Halverson, who's pitched just as equally well. Five games, 5 innings pitched, has only allowed 1 run. Hasn't struck out a ton of guys. Hasn't walked a lot either, which is positive in general. I think Victor Vodnik is pretty much a sure thing for a spot. After that, it kind of remains to be seen what'll happen. Jake Bird has performed really well. He's another one of those guys that can kind of go multiple innings. So I think he might have an edge. Jimmy Herget doesn't have any more options. He's been a little up and down, but he definitely checks off that more veteran relief presence. So I could very well see him. And then a guy like Diego Castillo. A lot of these veterans that sign these non-roster deals, they have a clause in their contract saying either by the end of April or by the end of spring training, if I'm not added to the 40-man roster, basically the active roster, then I get to opt out and maybe go shop my services elsewhere. And Diego Castillo's been, fairly solid, but the Rockies have been talking him up. They, again, like that veteran presence of a guy like that. And he's performed, I think, well enough where you could give that, give a job, give a role to a Diego Castillo, because if the wheels happen to fall off at a certain point, boom, you can get rid of them. No harm, no foul. And they free up a spot on the 40-man roster, and another one of those young guys can come up. But if you let him, go to another team because you don't put him on that 40-man roster and he pitches well, you don't have him, and now you're forced to rely on those young guys. So it's almost an insurance clause before the thing even happens, almost insurance well ahead of time. And so Diego Castillo, I think, would give you maybe a little of that insurance. So long story short, to Philip's question, it's really just Kinley and the 2 young guys in Vodnik and Halverson.
Yeah, and it's so nice as you continue to ring off names. Like, I feel comfortable with. Oh, that's great from Wild the Innocent, frequent commenter. But it's so nice to be able to feel confident in each of the names that you are ringing off. The Rockies have done a really nice job of building up depth at the bullpen position, and it's a spot where their young guys feel like they're ready to take the next step. One of the guys that is a grizzled vet, and he's looking the part these days, Tyler Kinley. Super glad you brought him up, because our good friend Thomas Harding did a great article on MLB.com talking about how Kinley has kind of shifted up his repertoire so far in spring training, and it's yielding really good results. That slider that we've come to know and love, wipe out, almost splitter-looking slider, Kinley threw 63% of the time last season, and so far in the spring, he's dropped it down to 29.4% while using his fastball 37% of the time. And he's throwing a new pitch, a curveball, it's 22% of the time. And so when Kinley was asked about it, he said, "It is so refreshing. You feel empowered. You feel like this is new. They haven't seen it yet, and so you're eager to use it." That is huge for a guy like Kinley at this stage in his career, fresh off a season with over a 6 ERA in 67 appearances. Like that, that's a lot of innings. It's encouraging to me that not only was Kinley able to find this new pitch, but the Rockies were able to develop it in the offseason. And that, I think, is such a good sign for getting young guys to buy in, because a lot of the guys on this roster, the younger pitchers, they've pitched the same way their whole life, and it's always worked because they've been able to overpower guys. Well, now you're in the big leagues, and I mean, Eugenio Suarez turned around a 97-mile-an-hour fastball from Dollander for a 3-run homer. It's a big step forward, but seeing Kinley introduce a curveball that so far is throwing about a fifth of the time while cutting his slider usage in more than half is something that has me optimistic for the season, simply because you can't teach an old dog new tricks, right? Well, the Rockies did with Kinley, and if they can do it with Tyler Kinley, then it kind of opens it up for everyone. And we've seen a mini resurgence out of even Kyle Freeland, 3rd place in Cy Young finishing in 2018, eventually got sent down in 2019. And then last season, after really struggling early, he had a fantastic stretch from June through August where he was going out there and giving you a quality start every time out. And so overall, I just think this is really encouraging as a fan of the franchise.
Yeah, Tyler Kinley, his best friend on the team the last few years has been Daniel Bard. And if anyone knows about reinventing yourself and salvaging your career, it's Daniel Bard. So I think that's a big thing that Tyler Kinley was able to learn and to pick up, especially after returning from Tommy John surgery, where he was so dominant and then just totally having it wiped away. And I think that's the perfect kind of guy to have in your bullpen and to have on your roster, a player who is an old dog learning new tricks and working through those things. I wrote about that for justbaseball.com right at the start of spring training, and Kyle Freeland saying, man, there was a lot, as you pointed out, when I went down in 2019 where, maybe I didn't want to listen to some of the things that was being told to me because a lot of these guys, and rightfully so, and this is true of athletes in all sports, especially the successful ones, they get to the majors, they get to the pros because of their own natural ability and their own ways of doing business. And all of a sudden, when that doesn't work, it's really hard to say, well, you've got to do something different for the first time in your life, when up to this point, everything you've done has worked. So Kinley doing that, I think, is a great example for these young guys to say, hey, you can't, I don't want to say rest on your laurels, but you've got to be able to adjust and adapt, because we know hitters will do that with young pitchers, and vice versa with any new players that are in the game, where you might have that early success and then struggle immediately thereafter, right? That's why it's called the sophomore slump, because the book is out on you after that first season, or sometimes even the first month or even a couple weeks. So you have those kind of growing pains. So knowing that you might have to change things just a little bit and reinvest in yourself in different ways. Tyler Kinley doing that, I think is a great example for a lot of the young guys on this team. And I think he's really lined up to have a really great season, hopefully one that the statistics do support, because Jalen Beeks was a guy last year that I thought was really good and better than his numbers were, but we got to a point in the year where there was nobody out in the bullpen that Buddy could rely upon. And so Jalen Beeks just kind of became that de facto guy. And sometimes when you're in that role, you might not be set up for success in the same way that a successful team is set up for success, and say, hey, we're going to use this guy exactly here, there, and it goes right by the plan. And, oh yeah, you know what? Don't tell anyone, but I'm really just facing 6th, 7th, 8th in the order each and every night when I go out. And so, my numbers might be a little bit inflated or deflated in terms of ERA, but no one really knows, because my manager is setting me up for success. When you're just struggling to get outs and you're blowing save after save and losing games late in the ball game, you just got to try to put a tourniquet on it. And that was the case for Jalen Beeks. So I hope that's not how it goes down for Tyler Kinley. And he does have an opportunity to get comfortable, get settled in a role, probably in the 8th inning, at least to start the season, with Halverson as the closer. And if that is the case, then I think the numbers will really show the changes that he's made this offseason.
It's fun getting excited for the regular season, which is opening day is getting closer and closer. I think we might have jinxed the Rockies when we were boasting about their success last week, because they won on Wednesday, and ever since then, it hasn't really been close with anyone. So maybe falling back down to earth a little bit, but they're still above 500 in spring training, which you love to see. Winning, regardless of if the games count or not, is really refreshing.
Yeah, it's strange because those early games, a lot of it was, some come from behind wins with the AAA, AA, or the quadruple A players coming in late, but beating other quadruple A, AA players. And now that it's been more of the true starters, the big league guys against the big league pitchers, the offense has kind of, suffered just a little bit. I want to say maybe 12 runs over like the last 45 innings, something like that. So, the offense has definitely taken a little bit of a hit, which is, disappointing to see. But again, it's spring training. Guys are working on things. It is what it is. But yeah, you got to take it with a grain of salt. But you're right. That is funny, because we recorded last Wednesday, right? And not last Tuesday. So yeah, you're right. They have not won since we've done a show, which means they are going to win on Wednesday, a game that will be on KOA radio. No, it will be on Rockies TV. Excuse me. Wednesday and Thursday will be on Rockies TV. So you'll have an opportunity to watch that if you get that. I think it's just free for everybody, right? This first month.
Yeah. Which, gosh, anytime we get a TV game to watch, it's honestly feels surprising. Which I don't know how we're in 2025 and spring training games aren't televised, and some aren't even on StatCast. You can send me out there for camera crew if we have to. Let's get these games on for the fans at home.
That is very strange, to say the least. Yeah, Wednesday's game is going to be started by Jake Woodford, who came in into a couple games as a reliever before he started the season as one of those starting pitching depth pieces. On Thursday, it will be Chase Dollander against the Cleveland Guardians, again on Rockies TV. That's exciting. And there's actually a question in the chat that was really good by Jack about what's the point of keeping a player like Jake Woodford around over one like Tanner Gordon. I think some of it has to do with logistics. Again, Gordon is on the 40-man roster, and if you ultimately decide he's not going to make the active roster, you could send him down so he could focus on, the tasks ahead. Whereas a non-roster invite guy, you can't really send him down to minor league camp. Either he decides that he's going to sign with you and on a AAA contract, right, and kind of suffer that fate, or he's potentially going to make your opening day roster, or he's going to make the roster of another team while playing for your team over the course of spring training. And okay, you don't have room for me. That's fine. I can go take my talents elsewhere. So it's somewhat of a logistical thing, but Woodford's going to get the start on Wednesday. I don't think he's supposed to go very long. From what I've heard, Wednesday was going to be more of like a bullpen game, but they've got Bradley Blaylock set up there too. So again, coming in that relief role. So maybe you get 2 from Woodford, 2 from Blaylock. Then you've got Zach Agnos, Scott Alexander, Jaden Hill, Diego Castillo. That gives you 8 guys right there. On the road, throw out some other rookie reliever that'll cover all 9 innings if you need to do that. So it's going to be more of a bullpen game, and I wouldn't look too deep into, Jake Woodford's getting a start here in this critical time of the season. Does that mean something major? Not really.
Yeah, I second everything you said there. But I can understand why, Jack's perspective. Like,
it's a great question.
Where is it coming from? Brian, I'll answer this one real quick. I'll be back in Denver for part of the summer, so not quite as good of a gig as last time. That's nothing with Blake Street Banter. That's just my schedule.
Are you 21 yet?
I am, yeah.
All right, so Brian is ready to buy you a beer. I mean, I know on Blake Street Banter, there's, buy a cup of coffee, which, can really go a long way to show appreciation for all the free coverage that we all create here together. But buy a beer for Noah if you see him after a game. You can schedule it. We'll have to figure it out. Did you know? Here's a fun fact. It's not going to be during the game. I mean, again, it depends on I don't know how you do your business in terms of that, but at one point when Coors Field first opened up, they did have Coors Light and Coors beer on tap in the press box.
Wow. Dang.
Wow is the right answer.
Wow. Were you there for that?
No, I was not.
God. You're pulling your leg a little bit there.
I'm barely 21 now. What are you talking about?
Exactly.
So, no, do the math.
And then I see one more from Philip as we wind down here. Really interesting question. The bat speed has gone up this spring compared to last year for Beck, McMahon, Nolan Jones. Saris says that Nolan Jones has shortened his swing by half a foot. Have the Rockies changed how they coach bat speed? Something had to have changed, and Patrick, I'll let you dive into this one more deeply, but what can you kind of point to that's contributing to this change?
Yeah, there's a lot more data that's out there, and the Rockies themselves are trying to get more and more data as they still have one of the smaller analytics teams in general, but they've been reinvesting on that side after the appointment of Brian Jones as the head of analytics and obviously the pitching lab. So I also think there's a lot more public information that's available out there with StatCast, but more importantly, we've just seen so many guys in the off season, if they're not going back to the team's spring training facility, which a lot of guys do, like a lot of guys live in and around the Scottsdale area that play for the Rockies so that they can work pretty much year round on those things. And then there are others that go back home and that, will work with various coaches on those kind of things. And, possibly get the benefits of that and understanding and seeing it played out before your eyes to really believe the importance of those kind of things. Because, there was a time in the whole launch angle movement where it just, it fell flat for some teams and for some organizations. And it really is just something you have to experience firsthand to really buy into certain things. And Daniel Murphy and Ian Desmond were two guys that really tried to change things in the way that players looked at getting underneath the ball. And I forget what Murphy used to always say, but he have this code that he would always say something like 6%. I think that was it. He'd say 6%. And that is the amount of ground balls that become base hits, something like that. And it's like, oh, okay. So yeah, all right. Maybe you do need to put the ball in the air. And obviously that was necessary at a time in which they were shifting, and you can't hit a ground ball through a wall of infielders. So you got to hit it over their head. And obviously that increases strikeouts. And so, there is somewhat of a trickle down effect to even the teams that don't have large analytical staffs to say, okay, here are certain areas that we can kind of make certain improvements. And I think you're seeing that from, as Philip points out, guys like Jordan Beck, Ryan McMahon, and Nolan Jones. So those are definitely positive things. The results haven't been there for Nolan Jones despite that shorter swing. So, that's not everything, right? The proof is in the pudding, and sometimes you put one too many ingredients that are proof worthy, and the pudding ends up tasting gross. That analogy fell off the rails. Go ahead, Noah.
I love that. That we might have to throw that on a shirt. We got Brendan Hardy being the Tootsie Roll guy, Patrick Lyons with all the pudding references in the world.
Patrick's pudding. There we go. I'm putting it out there.
Yeah. I think, of course, Philip, thank you for leaving the question. We love engaging with you guys, and this has been a fun show as we near the hour mark. I think I don't have much to add. Patrick, do you want to bring us home?
Yeah. Make sure you're following both of us at Noah Spirek on Twitter. Are you on Blue Sky yet?
I'm not.
You're not. All right. You'll get there eventually. You got to post anywhere and everywhere. You got to get on TikTok. I'm on TikTok. I'm all over the place with doing Rockies Insider stuff at Patrick D. Lyons, at Patrick D. Lyons MLB, or Rockies Insider. New Rockies Insider newsletter coming. Had some issues with my sore throat, man. Yeah. Some kind of virus that knocked me down for a while. Cocaine. Yeah. Is that what you're gesturing?
No, I've got a runny nose.
That was what it was. That's why I wasn't feeling well. I had too much of it. Noah, what was it? Nose ring? Oh, nose ring. Yeah. No. Bad piercing in my nose.
Yeah, I should. I need to work on my hand signals.
No, yeah, it knocked me out pretty badly. But getting the Rockies Insider newsletter back up there, and go out and check out the podcast. Had TJ Solverud from Truman Nation, who's got, I think, 27,000 followers over on Twitch. He's gearing up for MLB The Show. I don't know if you play MLB The Show at all, Noah, but I mean, now's the time, and he's going to try to be the first guy who wins the World Series. I think he got like a Ubaldo Jimenez card. I don't play video games to know how great that is, but from some of the content I've been seeing out of him, things are going well in the world of online Rockies and video gaming.
I love MLB The Show, and I haven't touched this year's game. I think it comes out this week, or maybe it just came out, but I saw our top 5 really quick. It was our fifth, the Rockies top 5, the 5th rated guy was a 67. So the Rockies went kind of viral for that, but it was Germán Marquez, which, come on guys, 67 for a guy that's been hurt. That feels rude, but that's all I'll say about MLB The Show.
I think TJ even mentioned in the podcast about what's different about MLB The Show 25 versus previous seasons, how the ratings are really low to start and then will increase over the course of the year, and actually go back and look, because I asked him, he's the expert. If the Rockies, if things go well over the next 2-3 years, which member of the Rockies has the best shot at being on the cover of MLB The Show? And so you got to go and listen to that. It might not be a solo guy, right? Because usually it's one guy that's electric. This year they went with 3 players with Paul Skeens, Ellie De La Cruz, and Gunnar Henderson. So maybe this one player with the purple background will be 1/3 or maybe half of that equation. you gotta check that out, or at least ask Noah on social media. Go ahead and do any other plugs that you might have, Noah.
Yeah, just on Instagram and Twitter. I've been working on this point all week after last week, but at Noah Spirek, and most of my takes end up right here on Blake Street Banter as well.
That's awesome. Yeah, appreciate that. Appreciate everybody dropping by this edition of the Rockies Insider on the Blake Street Banner. Noah, we did it. We did it with the help of so many folks over in the chat. Leave more comments, leave more questions. We can also respond to those on the YouTube side of things. So Noah and everyone in the chat, appreciate you giving all of us and all of Rockies Nation a little bit more momentum. But as we like to say, momentum, it's only as good as your next haircut.